Welcome to Postpartum Unfiltered.
The podcast where we get real about what happens during the postpartum period.
I am Jillian,
And I'm Sarah.
and we are two doctor moms who were not prepared for what postpartum would bring.
By sharing your stories, we hope to spread awareness and allow other families to be more prepared for the time after birth.
Mm-hmm.
Hello and welcome. We are here today with Jess. So I'm going to let Jess take a minute and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes. So, hello, everybody. I am Jess Hathaway Burkhart, and I got connected with Jill on Instagram via a mutual friend and peer. So, I'm happy to be here. I live in a little bit north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We live in the North Hills area there, and I now have a 7.5-month-old baby boy. His name is Caleb. And I have just been navigating the transitions of motherhood. He is my first. So it's definitely been a lot of adjustments for us. Um, I know I'll share a little bit about my birth story and just kind of my journey today, but I am in the prenatal and postpartum and women's wellness space. I am a women's wellness coach and lifestyle coach. But obviously, I know a lot of people that are also in that space alongside me. Everybody's journey is so different. It definitely has shaped how I now run my business and how I can help support women. And I've oftentimes found myself coaching myself during the postpartum journey.
Yes.
Um, so I think a lot of us tend to do that when we're in that space. We have to take care of ourselves first before we can pour into others. But I love what I do, and it has allowed me to be home with my son more. I'm also a fitness instructor and personal trainer as well. Definitely feel like all of that helped me along my own journey. But I do have a history of mental health struggles with anxiety and depression, and we can talk a little bit more about that, of how that kind of resurfaced a little bit in postpartum today. But that's basically how I got started in the wellness space. Was through that journey, and I'm grateful for it now because it brought me here, but also it's been a long road too. My original background is actually in culinary and pastry arts.
Oh,
So that's a
cool.
little bit of a fun fact about me.
Yeah.
Um, so I love food. That is definitely something. My husband and I are huge foodies. So
Love
definitely
that.
love to explore new restaurants and all of that good stuff. So I'm happy to be here and share.
Amazing. We're so happy to have you. So, Jess, tell us a little bit about the birth of Caleb and anything that you feel about that experience that ties into your postpartum experience.
Yeah. So a little bit backing up even a little bit more, I did work as a fitness instructor up until I was 40 weeks pregnant. So early on in my pregnancy, I had to tone it back a little bit for my own workouts. I did have a subchorionic hematoma early on that caused bleeding. And they didn't diagnose me with placenta previa, but because it was still really early, but I basically had placenta previa, which a lot of people do very early on, which caused bleeding also. So it was definitely a mental journey early on, with some scares there, because obviously we see blood oftentimes and we think the worst.
Of course.
Which, side note, a lot of women, once I opened up about that, experience that, and it's actually much more common than they lead us to believe.
Yeah.
So just if anybody's in that part of their journey, it doesn't always mean the worst. We were blessed that he was totally fine every time I got scanned. I was able to continue teaching. I never had to go on bed rest. But I did work up until then, and I think that that really helped aid in my birth of just staying active the entire time.
Mhm.
Um, Being a prenatal and postnatal fitness specialist, I think just the knowledge of that and even on the hard days, even on the days when you're super uncomfortable and you
Yeah.
don't want to move off the couch, even just going for a walk or getting up and moving around the house, I think really helped, because I did decide to do early on. I knew even before I got pregnant that if I ever got pregnant, I would want to do a natural birth if possible. And so I actually wanted a home birth, but my husband was a little bit skeptical of home births. I think a lot of people that are nervous about them just need more information. So I'm very
Yeah.
big on making an informed choice and not choosing from fear.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of education for myself and then shared that with him and my family. And we came to the decision and compromise of doing a birthing center birth, which is a
Nice.
nice compromise for people that if one spouse wants one thing and the other one wants hospital, it's kind of a nice compromise. So um, we had a beautiful natural water birth. I got to catch him myself,
Ah,
which was very cool.
yeah.
And we have pictures and stuff from my birth that my doula, I did have a doula as well.
Amazing.
Um, the great thing about a birthing center birth is the support team is much more hands-on than in a hospital where you might be a ratio of, you to a nurse, but that nurse is also taking care of, 4 to 6 other people potentially. I
Yeah.
had 2 nurses just to me and my husband and my doula. So
Yeah.
I felt very supported. Um, it was very much so a mental journey, doing natural birth. It's much more of navigating the mind and staying strong in your mindset to help with the discomfort of birth. There was definitely some times that I was very grateful that myself and my husband are both fitness instructors. So it was like he was cheering me on, my doula was cheering me on to like help me get through because I definitely, in hindsight, I knew now that it was transition, but when you're in it and you're in transition,
You're
you
in
don't always
it.
realize that
Yeah.
you're in transition.
Yeah.
And it just feels like you're dying a
Yeah.
little bit
No, it's
sometimes.
fine. Yeah.
Um, so that was the only moment where I was like, I need to get out of this tub, but also in the same thought was I'm gonna have to physically, if I want an epidural or something like that, I have to get out of the tub, get into a car, and drive to a hospital, which I knew
Yeah.
was just
That's
not
also no
realistic.
thanks. Yeah.
And so I just kind of muscled right through it, which I think too, that when you're in a hospital striving for a natural birth, I can imagine a little bit more difficult to go through with it because the drugs and everything are right there for you.
Mhm.
Whereas like in my case, I knew that they were not in the building.
Yeah.
So it helped me get through mentally. But mentally and just physically, it was such a natural transition for him to come out from water into water.
Mhm.
A lot of people that, sometimes you get the questions of like, how is that safe to have a water birth? And I'm like, well, they're in water, they're in
Yeah.
liquid already. So it's
Yeah.
not anything with their, lungs or they're not sucking
Yeah.
in water or anything
Again, that
like that.
education piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he had such a natural transition actually that he didn't get that full cry out, which helps to get a lot of their mucus and stuff out of their throat and their lungs. So we did have to wait for that to clear a little bit longer. But it was amazing. I mean, it was definitely felt like I ran 5 marathons afterwards. Even as somebody in the fitness space, it was still a lot on my body, but I will
Yeah.
say it definitely aided in my recovery, as did being in the water. Um, I had like a half of a tear. They couldn't even like code it as a tear, really.
Okay.
I didn't get stitches. I chose not to. They did give me the option, but I trusted in my body that with a half a tear, it was gonna heal just fine, which it has. Um, and yeah, I mean, it got me on my feet a lot faster afterwards. And I had such an amazing positive experience. Of course, there was like minor hiccups here and there because you can't plan birth perfectly to a T.
Yeah.
Um, but I would definitely do it again. And I talk about it with people that are open to natural birth, but might be a little bit fearful because it's definitely doable for
Yeah.
those that want it.
So what was that early postpartum, like immediate postpartum period like? Did you stay in the tub for a while? Like
I got
how did that
out.
work?
Um, we hung out in there, I guess, for a couple minutes. Um, I only had a push time of about 45 minutes. And with
Okay.
it being my first, that's pretty fast. Usually it's like 2 to 3 hours for some people. Um, I was like ready for him because
Mm-hmm.
with not having an epidural, you feel everything. You're
Right.
not banking on a monitor or somebody else telling you like, okay, it's time to push.
Hmm.
I You feel everything. So I think that helped it move along quicker because I was just going naturally with what my body was telling me to do.
Yeah.
Um, so once I caught him, we hung out in there for a little bit. They checked our vitals and everything, and they helped me out. He never left my body. I held him the entire time. We transitioned into a beautiful queen size bed, which was awesome. Um,
Yeah.
just hang out in there, and I birthed the placenta very shortly after, which all that was very smooth and went well. And he did a breast crawl. So we did our golden hour and he did a breast crawl to breastfeed almost immediately. It was probably within less than an hour of being earthside. So that was really cool. And we got that on film. And we hung out there and he was born at 11:40. We're recording this right now at around 11:40 a.m.
Yeah.
And that's all right when he was born,
Oh,
11:40 a.m.
amazing.
Um, and so he and I just kind of got to snuggle for a while and we hung out at the birthing center until about 2, 3 a.m. Just because they were monitoring us a bit. And we went home. They were going to allow us just to stay because I did have an appointment there the next day, but I was ready to be home and
Okay.
just get some rest. So
Yeah.
came home, rested for a couple of hours, got some sleep, and woke up the next day. And we did start having visitors right away, but not anything real crazy. It was just our parents and all of that. And we have a great support system where a lot of people were bringing us food. I had also meal prepped a lot prior to for frozen meals. I highly, highly suggest that
Yeah.
for women that are open to doing it because it was a game changer, especially if you're living out of state from parents and family and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but I felt pretty good. Tired, I think, was probably the biggest thing. But at first, it was just tired and just joy and trying to adjust to the newness of it all. But that at first time, you have all those visitors and all of that support. I didn't really start to feel down about things until after that all kind of starts to fizzle out a little bit. I did have very high sensitivity to him crying and leaving the house. I wouldn't leave the house without bringing somebody else with me, which I still, even 7.5 months in, still struggle with sometimes. Um, so that early part, we just did a lot of TV watching and hanging out and in allowing for people to support me, which is something that was new for me too, because I'm a go-getter, high achiever type, and I like to do things myself. But I tried to really check that even before I gave birth to allow for postpartum to not be like that and just accept all the help that I could get.
Yeah.
So,
So that going out of the house alone, was that more of like an anxiety struggle?
yeah, for
And
sure.
what were you
Was it
experiencing with that?
it wasn't necessarily the depression side. I definitely think it was more so and still is like anxiety just with the state of the world that we are in. As we all hear, horror stories out there about moms being targeted because we're distracted. Um, when we have the baby with us and all of that stuff in parking lots and all of that. So that kind of always is like the fear story playing in the back of my head. It was also the things like, what do you do when you're by yourself and they're having a meltdown in the car? Because there was definitely times when if my mom was with us or my husband was with us, I would have one of them sit in the back seat to like help distract him and calm him down because
Yeah.
I wasn't able to do that while driving necessarily. We've definitely stopped before and I've taken him out because he's been screaming. But one of the first times we went out, other than like for appointments, was to our local like flower conservatory, and we love to go there. And I just remember it was me and my mom and the baby going, and this was probably 2.5 weeks postpartum. And before we were even leaving the house, he was screaming, I was in tears and just had like a total breakdown because I'm like, I can't do this. I don't want to leave. If he's like this the entire time, what if he's like this in public? It's all those like what ifs. What if he has a meltdown in public and people are looking at me? And um, I've never gone to the grocery store by myself with him because it's like if you have a cart full of groceries, what do you do? And there's
Yeah.
other that I've talked to, and they're like, you just leave it. And I'm like, I can't do that. And I mean, we do live in a society now where pickup is like my jam. I do delivery,
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
subscription.
Bring it to my car. Bring it to my house. I'm here for it.
Yeah, because while I want to get over that fear, it's also sometimes not worth the mental aggravation of it. But we've definitely tried to just get out. But I do oftentimes wait until like there's somebody that can go with me. Because it's also at his age, he can't talk yet and all that stuff. And while I love spending time with him, it's sometimes more fun to have other people with you when you go and do
Yeah, I
things too.
don't think people want to admit how boring it can be to have like a newborn or a small infant who it's like, yeah, you're really cute, but you've just been lying there for the last 3 hours. And okay, yeah, that's what we're gonna do today. Just be here. Like,
And that, like I mentioned, I mean, I own multiple businesses and all of that. And it's just going from that and being go, go, go all the time to having a newborn, the newborn phase, I openly tell people was not my favorite. While it's so fun to have like that little bundle, and oftentimes people think that that's like the easiest, I'm putting that in air quotes,
yeah.
of being a mom, I find like this stage to be much more fun, even at 7.5 months, even at, I feel like 4 months, between 4 months and now. I mean, I've come leaps and bounds, and they also like as soon as they can start to like smile at you, and you can tell when they look at you, they're actually like looking at you and interact and able to like hit
Hmm.
a little bit more. That definitely made things better because yeah, it's definitely something people don't talk about, of you're giving, giving, giving to this tiny human right from the get, even beforehand when you're pregnant.
Yeah.
And that's all, yeah, that's all you do is like you're giving, giving. There's no reciprocation back from another human, which is a weird thing to
Yeah, it's
kind
like a
of,
new dynamic that we're
yeah,
not used to. And I don't think people
mhm,
think about it, right? Because you just think like, oh, you're gonna have this little thing. It's cute. I'm gonna love it. Of course, I'm gonna take care of it, and it's gonna go swimmingly because that's obviously how it's gonna work. And
yeah, for sure.
then it doesn't go that way, and you're like, oh, great.
Mhm. And I think too, a lot of people, we have that standard of like postpartum and having a new baby, that mom is going to be overjoyed and you're always going to be happy and you have this beautiful human that you created and it's amazing. And while it is all of those things, I don't think we hold space enough for moms to also admit when we're struggling or we are having those feelings of disconnection some days or some moments of the days, or we are tired and struggling to, with our own mental health and just all of the newness of it. Because, I still like, I'll reach out to some moms and they're just over the moon. And I hope that they are. I hope that they truly are that way. I wouldn't wish, struggles in postpartum on anyone, but I also sometimes wonder, like, sometimes I'll even say, depending on the person that I'm reaching to, like, well, how are you really? Because
Yeah.
you don't have to always be okay.
Yeah. Like,
Uh,
here's our safe space and let's talk about it.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I try to allow that space for women because I don't feel that there's enough of that out
Oh,
there.
for sure. And I think a lot of people are putting on the facade because everybody else in their immediate life are excited, right? Like, it's hard to be the friend and not be excited. It's hard to even be the partner, I think, sometimes and not be excited, Like, yes, your partner is also probably sleep deprived like you are, but they didn't just grow the human and birth the human and they're not feeding the human, if
Mhm.
you're breastfeeding. And I think sometimes we don't realize what those physical struggles can do mentally and emotionally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's always you,
Yeah.
especially if you are a breastfeeding mom. It's a lot. And while I'm a very big advocate for breastfeeding, I also can understand why, I did struggle with a bit of PPD and PPA, and I continued to just go through with breastfeeding, but I will say a lot of it sometimes did stem from being what they call the default parent. Like
Mhm.
you are the one that is always has to be on, and it's through the night and everything because you're not, that's something unless you want to pump and do it that way too, because that is 100% still breastfeeding. Um, but I was always like, that's just more dishes, so just let me do it. I'll just
Yeah. And
breastfeed
pumping can be
breast.
painful. And, and yeah, bottles now, they have at least 5 parts.
Yes.
I don't know who you think's cleaning all that. Plus the pump you have to clean. Lord.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was like, and so I just defaulted to, we just breastfeed from the breast, but it also is exhausting. I mean, you read those things on Instagram and Facebook and all over social media of like how many hours an average breastfeeding mom spends breastfeeding their child in the first year, and it's a full-time job.
Yeah.
Plus, then if
Astronomical.
run a business or have a job, it's a lot. So it's definitely a lot of pressure. And it's very easy to kind of get caught up in that mindset and sometimes spiral, but hopefully have the coping mechanisms and support to be able to get yourself back out.
Yeah. And so did you feel like that initial like bond and connection with your son, or has that like been a thing that developed and grew for you? And does that play into your mental health
That was
at
never, I
all?
had an immediate connection with him. I was always, we found out the gender very early on, even before the anatomy scan, because for me, that's how I started to connect. Even when early on, I thought I was having a girl. I was
Mhm.
convinced I was having a girl. We had a girl named picked, and then we got the blood work back, and it was a boy. So I remember I did have some gender disappointment, which is another thing that a lot of people don't talk about. It can happen whether you find out the gender early on or at birth.
Mhm.
I think for me, I would really struggle if I would have waited until birth and thought the entire time, the entire 9 months plus, that I was having a girl to find out that I was having a boy, because I
Mhm.
started that bonding experience from the day I found out. I turned to my husband, I'm like, okay, now we need a name
Mhm.
because I need to be able to, I would talk to him even when he was in my belly. And I would like, when I would have like even mental conversations with him, I would talk to him by his name once we had it. And we found out that we weren't having a girl and we were having a boy. Within less than 48 hours, we had a name because I was like, this is a priority for my bonding. And so that was never a struggle for me. I think there were times in early postpartum when you are so exhausted and they're screaming. And we had a lot of, and he still does, he's had some gastrointestinal struggles just with gas. And all of that. So early on, he was extremely uncomfortable and would just scream.
Mm.
They never labeled it as colic, but we were pretty borderline.
Yeah, right.
Um, but I just remember one day just getting so overwhelmed because you're exhausted, you're overstimulated from hearing screaming all the time. And I just like yelled, and he looked at me. And that was the one time where it was after, like, now I was starting to realize, like, he now knows what, we are intertwined, we are interconnected, and now he's more aware. And that's one piece of like mom guilt that I think I will always, it'll be a constant healing process. That moment of just like, I was just like, please stop. And I yelled at
Hmm.
and I regret it every single day because it's like it's not his fault, but it's also not our fault either of like you're just so tired. And that was really the only time where I felt a little bit of disconnect, but even in that, it was still a growing experience and still a bonding moment because then even, our children and really everybody in our life is a mirror for us. And that was just a mirror for me of like, okay, I have to check in here because there's something, my mental health needs a little bit more support, clearly, where I need to be taking some more time for myself and leaning more into support and, taking a break and not putting so much pressure on myself. Because that was the other thing, falling down the Google rabbit hole, I think is a big thing for people, especially first time parents, where and now we have social media that can be a blessing and a curse.
Right.
And I mean, I just saw the other day a reel of a mom shared of like when you're overwhelmed that aren't doing everything right. And in a world when we have sleep training and baby led weaning, and you're supposed to do this thing and that thing and have this and have that, just remember that there was once a time when we had none of that, and moms
Right.
just followed their instincts instead. And I think a lot of my overwhelm stemmed from trying to put us in a box of how things are supposed to be and doing a lot of shoulding.
Yeah.
And once that moment that I had with him really shifted a lot, and it allowed me to bond with him better, because I wasn't trying to force him into being a different baby.
Yeah.
I don't think I really realized that I was trying to do that up until that point, but I was just wishing, I'm like, why is my child the one that constantly has to contact nap and contact sleep? And when everybody else seems to be not doing that and they're doing it this way, and he has gas, why, like, what's wrong with me with my breast milk that's causing him to have, you have just all this constant wishing that it was another way when you run into a struggle, that I wasn't taking the time to focus on the positive things and just allowing myself to be and allowing him to be. And so I didn't realize that that was interrupting a little bit of our bond, but and it really didn't to a degree. I mean, there's some cases of postpartum depression and anxiety where the mom feels no connection at all. That was definitely not our story. I felt deep connection with him for months and months and months, even before. But it was just more so those things of trying to wish things else.
Yeah. And I think it's probably sometimes really hard to like be realistic with yourself about what is and is not in your control. Like, one, you feel very responsible for this new human, but two, you're also a little sleep deprived. Your body is still recovering. Like you don't really ever get a break, right? Like you said, birth was like 5 marathons. Well, then right after that, you got to heal from those 5 marathons, but you also got to start another marathon of like feeding this baby, keeping him happy and alive, and not sleeping while you're doing it, which is all not good for recovery. And
Yeah.
then on top of that, like I think we do have a society where the mothers are seen as very responsible for all of it, right? Like the first question you're going to get is, well, why didn't you, whatever? And it's like, bro, my baby was screaming. Okay. Like I did what I could. And that's just where we're at. And I
Yeah.
think like while that can be very stressful, it's also like a little bit freeing because you're like, oh, okay, let's start to refine this balance of like this is how my baby is and this is what I can do to support, like whatever's best for our family. And I think that's like the unique and individualness of what's best for every family is what I think gets lost in like social media and stuff. Because I can tell you what worked best for me and my family, but that may absolutely not be what's best for you and your family, even if we
Mhm.
have kids of similar ages or similar births or whatever. And
Mhm.
and so I think it's one reason I really like hearing all these stories is because they're so different and like everyone's doing okay-ish, relative, I'll caveat it because we're all in this postpartum business and it's the jungle sometimes, but we're here still. So that's a plus.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's so interesting to hear because even like you had a good birth experience
Mhm.
that seemed like pretty optimal for what you wanted, but still postpartum wasn't magical and amazing and easy.
Mhm.
And I think that's another thing people think like, well, if I could just have the birth I wanted, then my postpartum would be easy or whatever. Were there any expectations you had about postpartum before that either were different or that you feel impacted your mental health in postpartum?
Yeah, so I think you have like the expectations. I think what shocked me the most was the sleep situation and then just some of the struggles that he had um with his digestion because again, it's stuff that people don't talk about. So just you buy the crib, you buy the bassinet, you do all those things with the expectation that that's just going to be how it is, that all babies want to sleep in their crib or their bassinet, and that was definitely not him. We are a bed sharing family, and working on independent sleep because he's still very much so contact naps a lot of the time. And so I try to now think of it that like physical touch is his love language. I very much so believe that that's going to be the case because he also likes to
Adorable.
hold a lot.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's just how I kind of have shifted that and try to think of it more positively because it's exhausting. Again, like being a breastfeeding mom and also having a contact sleeper is a lot on your
Yeah.
body, um, physically. And so that was one thing, expectation of like, oh, that's just gonna be how it is. They're gonna sleep in his crib just fine, but that's not always the case. Breastfeeding came pretty naturally to us, thankfully, but we did have like he had a tongue and lip tie. He was taking in more air. We had to take care of that. So definitely things that again people don't openly like we're not posting on social media of like, oh, we got our tongue and lip tie release. I mean, I guess some people are, but um openly talk about their breastfeeding journey usually unless they're in the space and to talk about it. So I didn't really know that that could be a thing. So yeah, I mean, I definitely, I guess, thought it was going to be a little bit smoother. As far as the mental health side goes, I think looking back, I probably struggled a little bit more than I was admitting, but I think that was also because I have struggled with anxiety and depression in over a decade ago. It was really, really bad. So I've worked on that for over a decade of finding coping mechanisms and wanting to stay off medication. I haven't had medication in over a decade, once I weaned off of it. And that's something that I'm passionate about for myself because my body just doesn't do well with any sort of medication.
Mhm.
Um, so I try to stay as natural as possible. So I think that I was coping and I was using coping strategies as best I could, and I was more open about talking about it with my immediate support system. Um, but looking back, it was definitely a struggle and probably one of the hardest times I've had with my mental health since it started over a decade ago.
Yeah.
But I also try to remind myself of like we experienced the biggest hormone drop that you're ever going to experience in your entire life. And that takes over a year to regulate again, especially if you are breastfeeding, and then you get to experience another one all over again once you wean and stop that journey too. So I kind of expected to struggle when it came to the mental side. The physical part was not a concern for me because I took good care of my body up through birth and still try to. I mean, my workouts definitely look different now.
Yeah, for sure. I bet.
Carrying, humans around all day. So I try to acknowledge that
That's
this
part of
was
the
a
workout.
too. Yeah. Physical, I didn't have, it went as expected. The mental, also went as expected because I was expecting to have a bit of that going on. So I kind of mentally prepared myself for that piece, and knew when it was going on. Doesn't make it necessarily always easier,
Right.
but and I also fell into the Google black hole of, why is this happening to my child? What's in, I had to break that.
Yeah. Well, it's
Because
good, I think, that you had this history, that you had some coping mechanisms already in there. And then, like you mentioned before, you kind of coached yourself. So in your professional life, you also have these tips and tricks and ways to kind of work through things, which is beautiful.
yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you, Jess, so much for sharing your story. I had a really great time chatting, and I love hearing a good birth story with an interesting postpartum experience.
Yeah.
So, well, I really appreciate it.
We're finally getting on to we're coming out of survival mode and starting to get into thriving mode.
I love it.
And it's kind of, riding that wave of I think some days we're going to have survival days and some days we're going to have thriving days and some days might be a mixture of the two. So
Yeah, those days are long, but it's okay.
for sure. For sure.
Alrighty. Well, thank you again so much.
Thank you for listening to Postpartum Unfiltered.
If you enjoyed the show, please like, share, comment, or leave a review.
You can follow us on Instagram at postpartum.unfiltered.
If you feel called to share your postpartum experience, please contact us on Instagram or at drjilliancampbell.com.